These days, a growing number of people use social media as their primary source of news. But since influencers like Joe Rogan and Tucker Carlson have built trusting communities with millions of people, legacy news outlets are no longer the dominant purveyors of information.
There's this cacophony of different pressures that have fundamentally changed how we get information. And we've moved away from having a press corps to having an information economy. We're in the message war, all of us, because we have a phone and we can make videos.
So what's the risk? Aren't influencers implementing legacy media's tried and true fact-checking methodology? Can't we trust influencers? Is the news we consume on X, Facebook, TikTok, and Instagram trustworthy?
When you're consuming this stuff, you don't always know the motives of this person, their standards for providing information, and even who's paying them. And I think that we need tools to help us discern who is trustworthy, what standards they use. And I think audience members should be empowered to ask the creators they follow, what do you do to check a thing before sharing it with us? Who are your sources? Are you being paid to tell us this? And if so, by whom?
Jessica Yellin is an award-winning political journalist who started her career with traditional news platforms, including ABC, MSNBC, and CNN. Ms. Yellin boasts an impressive lineup of interviews with America's political all-stars, including former presidents Clinton, Bush, and Obama. And then one day, Jessica walked away from it all. She became the first news influencer and launched News, Not Noise. Jessica, thank you for providing an in-depth understanding of the impact of technology on journalism. Indeed, we are just in the early stage of this transformation, and your insight is compelling, to say the least. It was great having you as my guest on some future day. Jessica Yellin, welcome to Some Future Day. It's such a pleasure to have you today. How are you?
Hi, I'm great. Thank you for having me. This is a treat.
It's such a thrill. I must admit, I'm a little concerned and nervous because I'm doing essentially your job right now. So it's going to be tough to stand up to what you've accomplished. I mean, the people that you've interviewed, I was just mentioning to you before we went on air, are just incredible people. Presidents, President Clinton, President Bush, President Obama, really, really remarkable. It's really fantastic. So congratulations. But before we get into those people, yes, I want to read a quote from Oscar Wilde.
Okay.
And it's a nice blending between presidents and the media. You might have heard it already, but I want to get your thoughts about it off the cuff. So Oscar Wilde said, "In America, the president reigns for 4 years, and journalism governs forever and ever." In America, the president reigns for 4 years and journalism governs forever and ever. Jessica, what do you think about that?
First of all, you've done some impressive prep. Like, you have a quote ready to go off the top. That's good interview style. I'm a huge Oscar Wilde fan. I do think it is true. I say in Washington, the elected officials come and go, but sort of journalists and the political class are the permanent elite. They stay from administration to administration, no matter who wins or loses. But journalism is undergoing so many tectonic changes, it's kind of hard to know what that really means right now.
So we're going to get into that in a little bit. But before we go there, please tell me, so from a journalistic perspective, who's inspired you in your career the most?
Oh, that's a great question. There's so many people that when I was growing up, I watched 60 Minutes obsessively and thought that looked like a great combination of sort of doing good for the world and doing well in life, right? Like having a cool career and making a difference. I looked at so many of the evening news anchors and the reporters all over the globe of the major network news shows. I looked at Cokie Roberts, who was broke the glass ceiling for women in a lot of ways, Linda Douglas, obviously like Diane Sawyer, Katie Couric, all these women who were able to walk this line of being both sort of interesting and, to be frank, feminine people and very powerful and able and smart, where they displayed that as part of what they were encouraged to be in public. And it was one of the few areas, because I'm quite old now, where back in that day, women were allowed to be all those things publicly as part of their career. And then I got into the career and I ended up meeting a lot of those people who were my heroines.
So, it's often when one meets their heroine, they are let down, right? It's not exactly what they expect. Did any of them actually turn things the other way for you? Did you meet them and they exceeded your expectations? They inspired you even more?
I would say that there were so many people in my career who were encouraging or give me opportunities. I mean, I got some of my big breaks because of Diane Sawyer. I started on network news for her show, Good Morning America. So, I owe a debt of gratitude to her. And I was at ABC, so I knew Koki and Linda, and they were always available for a word or advice, et cetera. You'd said that your heroes sometimes disappoint when you get to know them. I would say that the industry was not what I thought it was once I was on the inside, right? It wasn't about the individuals, but it was the what the business has become, I think, is different from what it looked like and what it may have been when I was a little kid.
Well, back when you were, quote unquote, a little kid, you really did sit down with some major individuals. Again, I laid out the presidents in particular, President Obama, President Clinton, as well as President Bush. I'm curious, did any of those presidents inspire you as an individual, maybe to be a better person somehow, to do better in your career somehow?
I would say every president I've met, there's something about them that is the best I've ever seen or the most I've ever encountered, right? These are people who have exceptional qualities to get where they are. And I was always struck by that. I think Clinton had this combination of EQ and IQ that came together in every moment, quite famously, where he just relates to you in a way where you feel like his attunement is so high and his ability to explain is so exceptional. I always found that sort of inspiring. What I think my strength is breaking down complicated ideas for people. And he does that almost better than anybody I can think of, right? So that was inspiring to me. George W. Bush has this amazing ability, like his EQ is off the charts, and his ability to sort of read a room and sense what people need from him or want or are feeling, and then to give it or withhold it was amazing, like bar none. And his ability to make you feel unbelievably relaxed and at ease. And you almost forgot that he was the most powerful person on earth when you were with him sometimes, but he could turn it back on. So that kind of dynamic, and he had the most an exceptional ability to delegate, and he had a White House that truly empowered women and people of diversity in unexpected roles. So I thought he was under-recognized for that. And then Barack Obama is just an exceptional human in his inner calm. I mean, there's so many things one could say, but one thing that struck me that doesn't get much attention is his inner calm. When you're with him, the sense of almost a Buddha-like stillness inside, no matter what else is going on, was profound. And sometimes people interpreted that as sort of like a Spocky coolness, but I always sensed it as this meditative peace inside him, which probably came from the Hawaii in him.
Wow, that's so interesting. Thank you for sharing that, Jessica. I'm curious, when I was a kid, for me, there were certain politicians that inspired me to get out of bed and kind of like get into gear and do more, right? To learn and grow and be impactful. So for me, growing up, President Kennedy, I grew up in this house where President Kennedy was, really godlike, and it trickled down. And I aspired to be, this fearless leader who was able to break the walls down for, social justice topics and beyond. I'm curious, if you could put your finger on a politician today who inspires you, whether it's local, state, or federal, who would that be?
Gosh.
A politician that's currently in office.
I think that there are a lot of remarkable people. I tend to be most moved by activists and advocates who are sort of like Shannon Watts, who was a mom who started posting on Facebook after school shooting and created Moms Demand Action. But I think that there are so many young elected officials right now who are coming up and, trying to make a difference. I just happened to have the opportunity to meet Jasmine Crockett, who is a young, relatively young Democrat from Texas who's making her way. One thing I was struck by, what she told me, is that her senior senator, John Cornyn, who's a Republican, was often happy to partner with her to advance legislation where it was all about helping their district, and the idea that partisanship doesn't come first when it comes to constituent services and helping our people. And what was so upsetting about that and inspiring is like, yay, this still exists, and how crazy that this is something we should be elated about. When I first was aware of politics, this was, standard procedure. But we're living in a time where there's a lot of extremism that gets valued in the primary system. People who are the most extreme tend to get elected by our current political system. And I really gravitate to people who are both strong in their principles and willing to work with the other side. And I would have to go out, sit down, and think hard about who they are and come back to you. I mean, Wes Moore comes to mind.
It's kind of sad that it's not easy to just land on somebody sitting in office today. Again, local, state, or federal.
Mike DeWine, he does, what's right for his people, and then he takes political issues. Wes Moore in Maryland is a huge up-and-comer among Democrats. I think Gretchen Whitmer is a superstar. Had things gone differently, could have been the nominee this year. You know what I mean? Like, there's a deep bench on both sides.
So let's go back. You said you made a big statement. I'm not going to let it just pass us by earlier. You basically said that the business of news reporting has, in a way, not lived up to your expectations, right? So can you break that down a little bit? What did you expect the business of news to be, and what is it in reality?
I thought that the news would be about telling the most important story that must be told in the most, dispassionate and compelling way possible. And I assume that, sure, there are choices one makes to get, make the thing more appealing to the audience. But the importance and the value of that story is what dominates, right? And that informing the public and caring about getting them engaged to take action is what would matter. I found that in the business, the imperative to grab eyeballs leads to all sorts of other realities internally. Like, my long story short on what happened to the news business is, originally it was not a profit center, right, for these companies. When ABC, NBC, CBS came along, they were given the broadcast channels by the government, and in return they were told, you get this, but in return you have to do a public service and give us news. And it was just a trade. And so they did it, and the news was about the news. One can take issue with it because it was decided mostly by, white middle-class men who lived on the Upper West Side of New York, and that's a very specific demo, and now you have many more voices, but at that point it wasn't about profit. And then fast forward over the next 50 plus years, ultimately, they were all bought by publicly traded companies that have to report profit on a quarterly basis. And that profit pressure trickles down to the newsroom in the form of how can we get more ratings, and not just over the course of a year, but in time to show an improvement for the next shareholder meeting. And that put pressure on newsrooms to inform how they make decisions about what to cover. And one small example is now there's a technology that people in a control room have that shows them moment by moment, not minute by minute, but moment by moment, when people are tuning out and flipping the channel, and they know, like, oh, look, that topic went down. Oh, look, this topic goes up. Oh, we're holding. And these advancements determine what gets covered as news.
So what does that do to democracy? Like, to me, the journalistic tribe is so important as it relates to preserving a healthy democracy, right? Really reporting the truth. So what do you see transforming? Like, you're at the front line of things. You've been your entire career. Like, how is this transformation actually impacting America?
So first, there is one business in America, only one, that is explicitly protected by the U.S. Constitution, and it is the free press. And that is because the founders believed that having a free press was essential to a functioning democracy, because that's how you inform voters to make informed decisions when they vote. So this link between the press and our democracy is foundational. I think that the critique I just provided of what transformed news is specific to a time period. Like it's one piece of a problem. In addition, we also have the pressure that social media has put on the news, the rise of influencers, et cetera, which I know we'll get into. But I think there's this cacophony of different pressures that have fundamentally changed how we get information. And we've moved away from having a press corps to having like an information economy, right? Where every one of us is almost an information. We're in the message war, all of us, because we have a phone and we can make videos. And I think that the it's taken eyeballs away from news, put new kinds of profit pressure on them. And it means that they are under existential survival pressure to continue to engage the audience they have in ways that will get eyeballs on them, right? And what that means is often they'll see one story, they'll look at, they'll look at how a story is sort of ranking online, like what's getting a lot of clicks, and use that as a temperature taker to assign stories for the journalists who are on air. And instead of just having one person cover a popular story, they'll slice and dice a popular story into 3 different angles and have 3 different reporters covering the same thing from different angles and get hypersaturation on that one story. And all this means that it's almost a popularity contest to some extent. It also means that they're covering the things that get the most explosive emotional response from you. I always say the news competes for your anxiety because that's what's going to get you to tune in and stay tuned in. And that ultimately is bad for our mental health. It divides us, it polarizes us, and it's bad for democracy, but it's a business strategy to survive.
Do you think the citizenry knows that, Jessica? Do you think that they're maybe not, they're aware that they're not getting access to the truth and all of the news, but they're complacent with it? At a massive level, generally speaking.
It so varies. I have to say, like, it would help if I could explain a little bit of my story, and then you can understand where I'm coming from, because I'll tell you, my audience, when I share information with my audience, what they tell me is they don't trust the mainstream press, because the mainstream press traffics in clicks and virality and gets paid to tell us stuff. This is what they say, that we don't know who's paying them. But they trust influencers. And I'm like, okay, hold up. Clicks, virality, and paid to influence is literally the business of influencing. Like, why do you blame the traditional press for this and not influencers? I offer this to say that for some audiences, they've been so indoctrinated in all this that they completely mistrust the press. And I think, and only trust random online creators. And I think parts of the audience almost have a conspiracy about the media. So there are parts that aren't aware of what's going on, and there are parts that are overtuned to that. And I think we need a balance.
It's such a weird thing. It's almost like a psychosis has like transformed the masses in the United States in the way they accept media when they know that most of it is not accurate. Maybe it's not trustworthy. Perhaps legacy media is more focused on the narrative than the facts themselves. But yet they still take that, they consume that content, they take that knowledge, and then they fight the other side with all of this knowledge. It's such a weird thing that's happening in culture today.
I think it's partly because we're now in these thought bubbles, right? These information bubbles. And once you trust your sources, you mistrust the others. A separate thing is, I have this critique that we did such a good job of telling people that they're being manipulated by misinformation and disinformation and propaganda, and constantly warning audiences of this, that they're on a high alert. And they think that to be skeptical is to be smart and informed. But we've never given them the tools to discern what to believe. So they're taught only to disbelieve and never how to make decisions about what to believe. And so this like rejection response is very evolved, and their trust response is underdeveloped sometimes. And so they trust whoever feels right or gets in their feed or their friends trust. And it's this imbalance. And so I'll post stuff that doesn't really track with what else is in their bubble. And people will say, why are you saying this? This is not our information. Like, I don't believe it. I reject it. For example, during the Masa Amini protests in Iran, remember those when the Women Life Freedom protests? I can't tell you how many people online told me this isn't real. It's not actually happening. It's a CIA front, that they're just sending us these videos that aren't happening. You're like, why do you believe that, right? That's no.
Wow.
But they don't have the tools to discern how to decide what to trust always.
So let's back up again and focus on you, Jessica. You were recently I think it does provide context a little bit for the conversation and where we're going to go. So you were recently at the convention at the DNC, and it's interesting because it was the first time that you attended the DNC, not as a journalist or a reporter, but as a
creator,
as a creator. So can you explain that a little bit? Like, why are you all of a sudden a creator?
Yes. So
what does that mean? What does it even mean?
It's a good question. A creator really refers to somebody who makes their content and posts it as an independent person on social media. And I have a presence on Instagram and a newsletter that I send through Substack as an independent journalist. And there's a whole universe of us, very few of whom actually come from traditional news. A lot of the people who I attended the convention with there's an opera singer who sings songs and then talks about politics to some extent. So that's a different kind of influencer. I'm not that. But all of these influencers and people have a very direct relationship with an audience that has extremely high trust. And I would say that my relationship with my audience is higher trust than most. That's what I've built. And so it becomes an extremely strong bond. You know, they did a survey once. I saw that 40% of people who follow a creator on social media feel that they know you as well as a member of their own family.
Wow.
And that's because, you know, when you get your FaceTime call from mom in the phone, here, I'll find my phone. It's right here, right? Mom's face is there. But also when I pop up with a video, my face is there, right? Talking to you like your family kind of. And so that forms this parasocial connection. And I dialogue with people. I have a back and forth so they know me. And it creates this bond of trust that's very intense. When I left news to start this, I had a instinct it would be like this, but I didn't know the extent to which the connection would be this deep. And I think it'd be, helpful if I explain a little bit about why I left news with that.
I'm interested. Go ahead.
Okay. So I mentioned that I started in the news business because I wanted to do well, do good, and have a positive impact on, viewers, to inform them to participate in our democracy. And as I got into the news, and my goal was always to be White House correspondent. And as I rose through the ranks and did the things you have to do, I was constantly out talking to undecided voters, because when you're a political correspondent in an election year, that's who you talk to. And in those years, overwhelmingly undecided voters were women. And I was out in the field endlessly talking to the women, and they would scream at me. And they'd say...
Scream at you.
Scream. Yell, get pissy, you know what I mean. Like, And they'd say, I pay attention, I watch, my husband watches your channels or whatever, and all you do is fight. All you do is put on these panels of people who are screaming at each other and fighting. You get me so anxious, and you don't answer any of my questions. You tell me the world's going to end, and you go to commercial break. And then there's no solutions, no action. It just makes me hysterical. So I'm like, what are your questions? What do you want to know? And person after person would either pull out, like in the early days, they'd pull out clippings of articles or a notepad, right, that they'd have next to their grocery list. And then it was on their phone, like, is this person going to raise my, will we have healthcare reform under this person? How will they affect taxes? Like, they wanted very concrete, specific answers. I'm told that they'll, remove this deduction. What's real? And I'd go back to home base and say to my bosses, hey, there's this audience that's we're not addressing them. I'd love to try to create some segments that speak to them. And they'd say, no, if it's not happening now, it's not for us. We only do breaking news, or we only do whatever. And I was watching YouTube and evolve and watching these other platforms emerge. And the things that would do best there were explainer stories and happy news. And we did neither, right? Only negative things that panic you, and then nothing explained really. It used to be that my job as a baby reporter was to explain a tax bill and then toss to a panel that would fight about it. Now they don't do the explain part, they just do the fight part, right? So you don't actually know what the things are. What are we talking about? So when I couldn't get my managers or anybody to kind of see my vision, and I decided there's an opportunity here. When I left, I had started my career as a one-man band reporter in Orlando, where I had as my earliest jobs, I would film my own interviews, film my own stand-up, write the script, edit it, research it, put it together, and put it on air myself. So I went back to my origins, and I started making videos, 3-minute videos for social media, explaining what was happening in the news. And I was the first national reporter to do that. I created this model of how people are now telling the news on social media. Meta found my account and used my videos and went to newsrooms all over the world saying this is how you should tell news on social media. And it's now become the global standard.
Okay, so that's incredible and a big risk. I mean, what did it take you to take that risk, to jump into leaving this amazing career, the security of legacy media, and say, I'm just going to do this on my own? I mean, that's really brave, right?
That's nice of you. It was really scary.
Yeah.
But I also felt like I had to change. I had to make a change. And somebody I valued said to me, leap and the net will appear. And I don't know, I don't know what really made me know that this was the path to follow, but I knew I wanted to try a different way. And so when I picked up the camera the first time, I didn't think I'd become a news influencer or whatever. I thought, gosh, I know news needs to be told differently. I know there must be an audience that wants this. I'm just going to experiment here and figure this out. And making that first video was very, very, very hard. But after you get through those first few ones, it becomes easier.
Well, look, it's evident that net appeared, and that's really cool. But I got to ask you just a little bit more about your personality. Are you a risk taker? Have you leaped in other ways of your life and hoped that net would appear? And if so, when and how?
I mean, going into the news was a big leap. I didn't know anybody really who was a newscaster. I didn't know anybody who knew it wasn't something my family came from or I had any easy access to. And when I started, I had monumental rejection. Most efforts, I got a no. And so it steeled me with determination to get it done.
That's great.
And as I was rising in the ranks, I also always wanted to be White House correspondent and encountered endless no's until I finally got the opportunity to do it. So, and then even then, when I got that White House job the first time, it wasn't for me. I was told, we're sending you to the White House as a temporary fill-in until we can find someone else we like better. And there
was no way you were giving that up. Once you had that, there was no way. I see your personality. I mean, there was zero chance that you were going to be like, okay, now you walk in and take this, right? That was yours. You had the stake.
Through hard work, I did it.
Of course. So, something that I'm struggling with is throughout the last part of our conversation, you're referring to this new phase of your career as if you're an influencer. And I understand the definition you provided as a creator, et cetera. But for me, if I get the news from an influencer, something about it seems to be missing. Maybe it's not trustworthy. Maybe it's not accurate. What is it that we need to do to make sure that we're distinguishing, let's say, a typical influencer from a newsworthy, trustworthy influencer providing, reporting services?
I love this question. For me, this is what needs to develop further in both the audience's awareness and even in the sort of system of in social media. I think that, listen, I'm a journalist first. And so when I make videos and content for social media, it's as a journalist. Like, I think I'm providing journalism. I also make some content that has my opinion or my point of view. I think I'm pretty explicit when I say that, like I'm a pro-abortion rights person, pro-reproductive rights person. I believe in gun safety rules, et cetera. But I think one of the key differences between legacy media and all the digital new media is that inside legacy media organizations, there are set standards and there are rules and do's and don'ts. And among them are, you get two sources. If you're basing something on an anonymous source, you're supposed to have two sources at least. If you are, if you're conflicted in some way, like you're reporting on a thing and your spouse happens to work for that thing, you've got to either very much disclose that or give the story to someone else. There's all these guidelines and rules that don't exist in influencer content culture. And I think influencer content culture is also problematic because they're paid. A lot of people are paid to tell you what they're telling you, and they're not always revealing that, especially in the beauty space, in stuff where they're really influencing purchase decisions. It's not always transparent at all. And it's true in the political space increasingly as well, where people are paid. I mean, the Department of Justice today revealed that Russia, through a firm, was paying influencers to make content about immigration and domestic policy issues that's meant to divide Americans and serve Russia's interest of polarizing our society. So when you're consuming this stuff, you don't always know the motives of this person, their standards for providing information, and even who's paying them. And I think that we need tools to help us discern who is trustworthy, what standards they use. And I think audience members should be empowered to ask the creators they follow, what do you do to check a thing before sharing it with us? Who are your sources? Are you being paid to tell us this? And if so, by whom?
So how far do you think that the creator or the influencer needs to go with regards to disclosing her personal beliefs? For example, you just shared that you're very transparent with your community about things that maybe is not is information that they really have no right to access. For example, your opinion with regards to being pro-choice. Like, why does your audience have to know that? And should influencers take it to that level of disclosure? Is that a part of new journalists, like a new journalistic level of integrity?
I think that yes, because on some issues, my coverage is pro-repro rights. Like, I'm pretty clear that that's what that's where my coverage is, right? It's a tone thing. It's a POV thing. If I'm covering a school shooting, I'm going to just give you the facts, right? But I might also do a video that explains how widespread school shootings became after we waived the assault weapons ban, right? Or there's a law that limits liability for gun manufacturers. You can't sue a gun manufacturer if their product kills people, but you could sue a food company if their product kills people. Why? I'm sharing that information because I think these laws are problematic. And I want the audience to know that that's a point of view, right? That's not an objective, that's not an absolute, no, it's just opinion. I think it's a responsible thing to share when your perspective is very strong and clear in certain areas.
It's interesting because I think that concept of safeguarding integrity is critical to journalism or even influencer journalism. But I think there's going to be a big drop off because when you start to look at the next generation, let's think in terms of Gen Z and even Gen Alpha, honestly, my 7-year-old daughter, Damaris, gets news and comes to me to talk to me from what she's seeing on TikTok. There's a big drop off when these people are looking at Joe Rogan to report the news. And Joe Rogan doesn't care he doesn't fancy himself a journalist. He doesn't care to institute the types of protocols, procedures, traditional safeguards that you're talking about as it relates to the industry of journalism. So what happens to the next generation? clearly Joe Rogan is not a journalist, and clearly he will never hold himself out to be, and therefore he will never institute the protocols that you're talking about. So how do we close the gap when it comes to people like Joe Rogan?
I think it's about teaching people critical media literacy skills and arming the audience with the tools to tell the difference and to be properly skeptical and ask a lot of questions. You know, a lot of when I referred to the convention, people who went, you know, and provided news coverage from the convention in a way, political information, weren't always covering politics, right? Some of them are talking about the fashion there or talking about, you know, the performances. They come at it from different points of view, and then they insert the politics and news into what they're doing. And that's increasingly how younger people are getting their news. But I do think that they also get news from people who are more traditional. They're not journalists per se. Maybe they haven't worked in a newsroom or they don't have that training, but they are professional explainers, right? And when you're listening to those people, I think it's on us and it's on parents to teach some basic skills. You know, and I have this problem from my friends even who are very educated and very grown up, and they'll send me a video and say, "Why aren't you reporting this?" And somebody's screaming about something, and I'll watch it, and I'll look at the name of the person who made it, and you click on their profile, and it just says like Chaz. And you're like, okay, Chaz 1297. And you look up Chaz 1297. If there's, you're like, is there a link to who is this person? What is their credential to say this thing? Where do they come from? Who are they paid by? And if there's no information, you're like, don't listen to that person.
But that problem, Jessica, goes even further. Like, think about Tucker Carlson this week. He had, honestly, like what I would categorize as a fringe historian on his show. So
white nationalist Nazi is what he is. Like, that's a generous term, fringe historian, white nationalist Nazi lover.
Fair enough, right? So I agree with you. Obviously, I agree with you. But the problem is that if I trust Tucker Carlson because of his background as a journalist, and I assume as an adult that he's instituting the same protocols and safeguards that you're articulating, and then he brings in a guest who is a white nationalist Nazi, and I'm consuming my content, but I'm not aware that he's not legitimate, right? Maybe I'm a 20-year-old kid in New York City and I just trust Tucker Carlson because, you know, I have blind faith. What happens in those situations? Like, how do we protect the public from those situations?
I agree. It's extremely worrying. And
right?
I think we're in this place where we're fragmenting into these smaller and smaller like bubbles of people who are getting information from their trusted individuals. And, you know, we're sorting into like-minded communities online. I think that it just means it's imperative that people who are thinking about this culture, and especially people who are, you know, have the money to invest or have the skills and knowledge of this space, don't abandon media and continue to think about what tools can we build to help people understand and make distinctions between who is credible and or what category, like this content creator is like what other entities online. What community do they reside in? So then you can at least see, oh, Tucker Carlson resides near Nick Fuentes and these other white nationalist people who are explicitly white nationalists. That tells me something about him. Like where is the innovation in this space to help us have some tools to understand what we're consuming? The one other thing I'll say is we are in this period of rapid change, and, you know, you sort of like split, and then lump. And it might get to a point where we've gotten so insular in our little bubbles that as a pendulum kind of dynamic, there'll be innovations that kind of bring us back into network relationships with where it's not only determined by, you're not only following this one influencer, but you see him as part of a larger community as an online network maybe. And that also helps you make judgments about who they are and who they affiliate with.
Fair enough. I mean, I think that, you know, obviously that's super important, but you also talked earlier about the United States Constitution, not just free press, but freedom of speech. So, you know, should Tucker Carlson as a free speech absolutist, right? He like believes in all free speech. Should he host people like that?
Oh, God, no. No, I mean, Tucker Carlson's being cynical and reckless in making these choices. And it's unclear why he continues to reflect Kremlin talking points, promote points of view that align with Putin's agenda, support despots or foreign leaders who are also anti-NATO and American interests. But he does that with, like, I used to say it sure seems like, or it sounds like, or people allege that Tucker Carlson does these things. It is so blatant and explicit now, one doesn't need to couch anything. He's gone to Russia and talked about how Russian supermarkets show how toxic and dysfunctional America is. You know, it's like bonkers.
I saw that video. I thought it was weird too. But if there are all these tribes, Jessica, that are like built into social media platforms now, reporting the news or information from their perspective, like I think you had used the word information wars. At the end of the day, are people just attracted to that information that they want to hear? Or are they able to cross over and discern from Tucker Carlson versus, you know, perhaps somebody that would realize that Daryl Cooper is a white nationalist, Holocaust denier, Nazi?
I mean, it really depends on who. Like, I think that there are people who, of course, see that for what it is. There are people who love it and flock to it. And then there are people who just get sucked in. And you know, I've done enough reporting on disinformation and propaganda and how this works to understand that to some extent, some of this is like being indoctrinated into a cult. And when somebody's coming out, they need, you know, deprogramming, basically. It's very true of people in QAnon. And it's hard. I always think that you focus on the people who are curious, like interested in the material, but not yet fully bought in. Those are the people who can be, you know, spoken to and engaged with. And there are some clear strategies on the best ways to do that. You know, it's a lot about, like, if you have a family member or friend who's sort of getting pulled into that and super curious, they say, don't tell them it's wrong. Don't dispute the facts because it's oppositional and you'll come up against resistance. You instead ask provocative and leading questions that they can take away, and maybe the questions turn over in their head. Like, why would he say that about America while he's in Russia, especially while Russia was holding U.S. hostages, like, or prisoners? That's just so weird. Nobody does that. Why would he do that?
But why does he do it? Like, is he an influencer or is he a journalist?
Tucker Carlson's not a journalist. I mean,
But he's not what you are. He's not the same as you. You're talking about standards and protocols and safeguards to make sure that the news you're reporting has integrity, yet he's hosting a Nazi.
Yes, but I don't think he's a journalist. I think that he's a extremist, influence actor. He's a disruption actor. Like, he's peddling propaganda for an agenda. Part of the agenda may be to advance his, you know, get him a lot of eyeballs and clicks. I do notice that, you know, he's gotten less public attention, and as the less public attention he gets, the more extreme he becomes. I don't know to what extent he believes what he's saying, but he's clearly found like a white space in the marketplace that gets him eyeballs.
Well, he couldn't report like this on Fox. I mean, that's very obvious, regardless of what your personal thoughts are with regards to the Fox network. Like, he couldn't report like this on Fox. So do influencers reporting the news on social media platforms have more leeway or the ability to report different types of news?
Of course. I mean, they can say whatever they want. You can host whoever you want. And if you're on X and Elon Musk likes what you're saying, they seem to tune the algorithm. It just coincidentally happens that Tucker Carlson gets way more views than most people on X. So, it depends who's hosting you, where, and of course, you could do anything you want. When you talk to people who are experts in extremism in the U.S., national security officials, FBI, law enforcement, what they will say is like QAnon and these conspiracy theories, these far-right conspiracy theories, is the first form of extremism that the U.S. exports to other nations. And it is at the top of their list of the greatest threats to the U.S. And there, we always talk about pendulum swinging and cultures changing and, ebbs and flows that are natural. But that was before the explosion of this massive technological web that connects us around the world and allows us to share information so rapidly and find like-minded people or convert like-minded people so quickly. And it is a danger. Like, if you're talking about real threatening extremism, it's a danger. That's on the far edge. And I would say that happens could happen on the left and the right. But I would say that there's subtler forms of this where people are just sharing divisive messages. They're sharing, amplifying, toxic hate, spreading narratives that are dishonest, misleading. And we don't have checks on it. I was just talking to my brother who has kids who are, 13 and I think 8, and how they'll come to him and say, "Dad, why is this happening? Such and such." And he'll say, "That's not happening." And they'll be like, "No, so-and-so told me that on YouTube." And, they're very informed and they want to tell him.
Yeah.
And he's like, "It's not true." And he tries to explain, but they're very convinced it is because this person they've trusted for a long time is saying it is true. And I think we need tools and oversight to help enable parents to help kids with this. And we need more regulation on the platforms.
Do you think that we can just also rely on individual integrity and responsibility? You mentioned
No.
Elon Musk and X earlier. Where does Elon Musk's role fit into all of this? Does he have some accountability with regards to making sure that there's a free flow of ideas and information, but they're done with integrity and honesty and we could trust it? Or does he not have any responsibility?
I mean, can I just say, I came from a family that believed in the best in people, and that my dad was JFK's personal page on the floor of the Democratic Convention in his convention. He was like you.
Is that true?
Yeah. Our most prized
so cool.
possessions in the house. Like, my parents had, objects that were valuable. We could touch anything, right? If I broke a nice dish, my mom was like, "Go sweep it up." She didn't scream at me. There's objects weren't that precious. But there was one thing I wasn't allowed to touch, and it was my dad's collection of Life magazines about the JFK assassination, right?
Wow.
He believed in ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. He indoctrinated me in that. I grew up believing in do well, do good. And we live in a world now where those are not dominant values. And I do not believe that I do not assume that most people are motivated by high integrity and doing the best for everyone. I think many people are, but I think our culture is deeply craven, and our media culture is about taking as much off the table for yourself as you can at whatever price necessary. And I have encountered that in in my career, especially as I've tried to build this brand. And I think Elon Musk is the best example of that, and he is celebrated for it. He's brilliant and enormously talented. He's made great changes for the world. But what he has modeled at X is absolutely destructive to democracy, to mental health, to our faith in the fabric of society.
That
was grim.
No, that's a very strong statement. And it's unfortunate that we can't self-regulate at all. It seems like, we're looking at a situation now, like you deferred to it as well, where it's always like the government should regulate the media, the government should regulate X, whatever this platform is now. But the reality is that as an adult in society, we should self-regulate. It shouldn't just be a free-for-all, in my opinion. I think there needs to be freedom of speech, but there also needs to be a situation where, we're not harming young children, or we're not harming the way that systems work within our country. Infrastructural systems are actually impeded from time to time because of false news that's running through social media platforms. So at what point do we get back to integrity, respect, and individuals taking this type of a stance on topics like this? Do we ever?
I think you can find enormously high integrity individuals, and you can get to spaces where, that's what I want to build. I want to build a community where these are trusted voices, right? And if you trust me, these are the people I trust. Or if you trust him, those so that's a gated, how to discern who to believe if you're in our zone, right?
Right.
And I think there are a lot of places where you can find something like that. That's basically what Condé Nast was in a way, right? That's basically what a network is. But when you're asking, can you broadly just trust the internet? No. And I think it's a little unfair to say that it's a responsibility of individuals. And when they get to build a business and then an algorithm changes, an algorithm that's invisible to them, for which they have no transparency, that destroys their business or their visibility, and they have to make adjustments to get their stuff seen. And the truth is these platforms are having it both ways, where they pretend to be neutral environments to host content, but then they're putting their finger on the scale to send much more content out if it's certain kinds of content, right? And that's not neutral. And that's what I think needs to be either more transparent to the public and or regulated.
Jessica, that's on social media, but aren't we talking about the same conundrum in legacy media? Like you and I had previous conversations about the concept of being addicted to stories, and you spoke about it, you hinted to it a little bit earlier when you mentioned the fact that legacy media journalists are today chasing the narrative that receives the most clicks. So is it more important for legacy media to monetize the content or to report the facts? Isn't legacy media guilty to a certain extent of what social media is guilty of today?
The extremes on social media are much wider. Like the delta is much wider on social media, and the harms are much greater. Inside legacy media, there are ways in which the content and the choices have been changed by the profit motive and by, the technology that shows them how to, grab the public's anxiety. And so choices get made around. They make choices about that. I think the media has become much more opinion-driven and less objective and all those things,
sure.
right?
For
so
sure.
we know that. But we do know, if you're a viewer, Fox leans right. And if you're a viewer, Fox leans right, and that some people say they amplify stuff that's not quite true often. If you're a viewer, MSNBC leans left. And the range of what they will report is much less, like, yes, they'll put on the loudest voices from Congress, but they won't. But when they put on people who lie, they endeavor to correct that. Now, I know there are exceptions and there are times they fail at the job, but they do have these standards and aim to uphold those standards. I think, when I say that they don't report things, it's like they don't report on poverty. They'll go into parts of this community when there's like a riot or a police killing, right? But in between, you don't really hear about what's going on in communities where those things happen very often. There are parts of the world they don't report on, right? Because they don't get enough eyeballs, or they think they won't. There's a lot until recently they didn't report on women's health much. Abortion was being eroded for 50 years and got very little coverage until Dobbs, because it wasn't considered an attractive or interesting story that would get eyeballs. It's that kind of thing. It's not platforming a Nazi-loving, Holocaust-denying, extremist like Tucker Carlson. So we need to have like a little bit of, context for how we're criticizing these different categories of voices.
How connected are the political parties to the legacy media now? Like, it seems they're almost like this pack mentality, not just with like an addiction to telling the same stories, but also the way they tell the stories. So like something will happen and you'll hear all the reporters, whether it's on the right or on the left, using the same words, using the same phrases, the same terms of art. And then you see the politicians using them as well. Are the politicians influencing legacy media? Are the political parties influencing legacy media?
I mean, let's just step back and think about like the beginning of this conversation where you asked, the president's there for 4 years and the media's there as a permanent reality. I don't remember the exact quote. Of course, Oscar Wilde said it better. It's what he did.
Of course.
People who cover politics live in DC and New York, and they in that category of politics, and they spend time with the elected officials, and they have, when I was in that space, they had us in for briefings. I remember there was this time when I was covering the Iraq War, or before I got to Washington, I noticed that everybody started calling the response to something robust with the war. There's a robust response. And I'm like, why is everybody calling it robust? That's such a specific and odd word for a military response. And then I got to the White House, and I started covering the briefings and, the background briefings, and they were discussing this as robust. And so, you go out and you use that word. Sometimes that's how that happens, right?
Interesting, yeah. I didn't know that. That's interesting.
But is it necessarily, I think that's problematic when there's no critical coverage in addition, when those are the only language, that's the only language used to talk about it, or when the only stuff that gets through are the topics and framing that the White House or people in power choose. It is not in itself a bad thing to reflect what their policy makers are saying and to convey that to the public. I think we would be served to have more of that. Imagine if you heard regularly from the White House why they are making the choices they are making in global conflicts in the U.S., right? Here's why we're sending weapons to such and such place. Tell us over and over and over again. Wouldn't that help the conversation around these conflicts? I think that's important, and it's not done enough. But what you need to do as journalists is also cover other things like the criticism or what that is doing that the White House isn't talking about, right? It's the surround sound stuff that needs to be filled in more.
So much of it seems like so sophomoric from time to time, too, now. Like last night, I think Peter Doocy was questioning about Kamala Harris's accent or tone that she was using in a certain setting. Like, it just seems like there's just even fighting at a level that just doesn't make sense, right?
But that goes back to why I started News Not Noise. Like, literally, my brand is called News Not Noise. And our tagline is, we give you information, not a panic attack, to correct from all that. Because the news became so noisy with all these silly, shallow questions about so-and-so didn't return so-and-so's call on Capitol Hill. Oh my God. Or,
right.
Who cares?
Inconsequential, totally
Obama's
ridiculous.
tan suit, or
right.
Kamala Harris's, having a twang when she's talking in a southern state.
Right. We're living in the age of dumb, Jessica.
It's also a vibes election, right? The candidates are themselves not talking that much about policy. This is not exactly a policy-dense campaign. And a lot of it's being waged on social media. A lot of it's just about these spots and ads and attacks. And it's a feeling, it's a vibe, it's a brat summer, it's a, MAGA scene. So part of the reporting is keying off of that too. And they both amplify and extend one another.
I wonder if that vibes election moment is because of the politicians and their parties or because of the American public. Has America been living off of sound bites for so long now that we just don't want to do the work? We're the voters, but we don't want to do the research. We don't want to do the work. It's enough for you to hit me emotionally, to make me look at class warfare and look at certain rights that I'm going to lose if the opposition is elected. Maybe the Americans are to blame.
I used to want to say all the time, when I was on CNN, people would ask, why is Congress like this? And I wanted to say it's because of you, the voters. You're electing these people. So I do think, when I started making my videos, I could make a 5-minute video or a 3-minute video. Now people want 90-second videos. The stuff that performs best is less than 30 seconds, right?
There you go.
There's no way you can cover the complexity of life in that way. But we should also point out that podcasts do well, that, streamers have an entire business of documentaries. There is a place for more depth. It just so happens that it's generally crime stories that people want, but whatever.
But certainly it's detrimental to America's health. I mean, think about, for example, we have the the presidential debate coming.
Yeah.
And to me, when I was younger, the presidential debate was really, really amazing because you would get policy arguments that were giving us like insight into how Americans would propel into the future. Right? Like these are concepts, whether it's a social concept, an economic concept, a geopolitical concept, but here are new innovative ideas that the presidential candidate from the left and the right are going to provide and show us how we can advance as humankind. Now, how could we take such big concepts and in a 2-minute debate with a timer add value to the American public? I just don't think it's possible.
In the Republican primary, before Trump was a nominee, they had a period where it was 1-minute answers for everything. And they had like 9 people on stage. That's not a conversation even, let alone a debate. That's just like a shout fest where you have to get in your most out. And it's just about, it's because the public doesn't want to listen and they won't be, there's this assumption that people won't be patient and listen to the longer answers. I mean, we have, our attention spans have shortened and there are a lot of problems we have to contend with.
For sure. I think there would be a lot of people that at least friends and family that I know who would listen to a 3-hour conversational debate, a conversational style intellectual, smart debate between Harris and Trump. Give them 3 hours, give them enough reach and breadth to really flush out their ideas and their policies and their vision. But, Jessica, you've been so amazingly generous with all of your time. But before I let you go, we have a tradition here on the show. Some Future Day, the name of the show, was inspired by James Joyce. And what I like to do is I like to have each guest finish it's almost like a leading question. I start the sentence, you end it. Are you game?
Yes, but I'm not prepared for this.
No, that's the whole trick here. Come on. So in some future day, Americans will be ready for neutral-based media when?
Oh, wow.
In some future day, the American public will be ready for neutral-based media, for neutral content when?
I'm going to say within 10 years. I'm told that is the horizon when AI will be up to speed, will be able to function the way we need it to function. And it is my hope that with that development, we will have more sophisticated ability to get sources that are from a variety of perspectives and understand where the information is situated. And that will help us demystify some of what we have been talking about, and people will be able to seek out more neutral information.
Jessica, is there anything else that you'd like to address or talk to before we end?
I would just say that folks who are following anyone, even if it's a media brand, take the time to look at who is on the board, who is financing it, who founded it, what their standards are. Feel free to ask them. There's a lot of new media that's being set up. Sometimes it's by people who are just wealthy individuals who want to get their point of view out. Sometimes it's people who have a very specific point of view. Sometimes it's funded by Russia and you don't even know it. So it's worth asking those questions and checking out who is the person giving you this information, and having the confidence that you have that right to know.
Big statement, Jessica. Thank you so much for joining us today. I appreciate it.
Thanks for having me and for the work you're doing. This was a super interesting conversation. Last thing I'd say is if you want to follow me, I'm on Instagram at Jessica Yellin and on Substack at News Not Noise.
I know your time is very important, so thank you so much for joining me today. For ongoing insight surrounding these important topics, you can join the conversation on my social media channels, including Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn at Marc Beckman. And to sign up for my newsletter on Substack, you can find me at marcbeckman.substack.com. To make sure you don't miss a show, be sure to subscribe to Some Future Day across all major platforms worldwide, including YouTube, Spotify, and Apple. Special thanks to New York University for producing Some Future Day, and a big shout out to my producer extraordinaire, John Boomhofer, for being patient and always encouraging me to push through. Thanks a lot, John. Have a great day.